You look at the repetitive tasks, which are monotonous tasks, and that's where you actually focus on in the beginning. So let's say you identify a certain process in a factory floor or a warehouse. You look at that there is a repetitive pattern, that these are the tasks and this is the SOP, and which can be replicated by the automation system. That's a good way to start looking at building something on the hardware as well as the software side, so that you can get that monotonous job done in a better way rather than doing it manually. In terms of the value add, it should of course have some value add on the floor. Just because you can automate, you should not automate. There should be some value add or some impact on the operations or on the customers. So let's say what is the productivity improvement, whether people are doing much more with the robots, whether you are able to increase the accuracy, whether you're able to increase the speed, whether you are reducing the touch points. So those are other buckets you look at, and you technically can make a business case. And if the business case is good enough or it's attractive, that's a good sign that you should work on automation.
Hello and welcome to the Startup Operator Podcast. I'm Roshan Karyapa. If this is your first time here, we curate insights from India's best founders, operators, and investors. Learn all of the nuances of building and scaling a startup. On this episode, we have Pramod Ghadge, the co-founder and CEO of Unbox Robotics, speaking about what it takes to build and scale a hardware startup. We discuss how customer acquisition works, what drives their product roadmap, how software standards have evolved, how they plan to grow and expand over the next 18 months, and other nuances of the logistics and supply chains space that Unbox operates in. Before we dive in, if you like our content, don't forget to rate and review us on your favorite podcast platforms. It helps more people discover us. And also, a shout out to our sponsors. This episode is brought to you by Park Avenue. More about them later in the podcast. Without further ado, here is Pramod, co-founder and CEO of Unbox Robotics. Listen in. Hey Pramod, welcome to the Startup Operator Podcast. Thank you so much for making the time.
Thank you, Roshan. It's a pleasure to be on the podcast. Looking forward.
Awesome. I know that we've gone back and forth. I was really keen on this conversation because we don't have a lot of hardware startups, and certainly we don't have a lot working in robotics and those kind of things, right? So really keen to understand how your space is and how you're executing. Let's start with that. Actually, we don't have a lot of hardware startups. What are some of the nuances of building a hardware startup? Because I understand it's not as simple as the whole fail fast methodology that we follow in software or consumer tech as such. So what are some of those nuances?
Yeah, so generally the advice is given to the founders that you build an MVP and then you try to fail fast and you iterate to the next version. Some principles do apply here as well in the hardware startup space. However, there are, let's say, a few the details or nuances people in the hardware category need to understand, like especially when you are trying to sell to the enterprise customers who are actually like looking at uptime and all the highest level of reliability metrics within their factories or warehouses. So even your MVP should not really hamper their operations. So what can be advised is you select the key features to start with. You build an MVP, maybe a working prototype which can do its job in a limited functionality or with a limited set of features. You don't go overboard with the feature list of like different features on your robot, or let's say whatever hardware device you have. You take the initial feedback from the customer, from a POC, kind of a proof of concept or a demo trial, and you start iterating based on that feedback. So it's always better to do these MVP testing inside the customer facilities or working very closely with the customer, so that you get the feedback early on rather than building the product in silos and you come up with a product with a list of features and then you fail. Because it takes time to iterate from one merger to other, it's better to keep your customers very close to you, invite them for the demos, deploy your system. Maybe initially you may need to do it free of charge when you do it like a very small trial or demo. But the customer feedback is super important, because the cost of rework and the iterations are very high compared to what we have in the MVPs of software world. So that's definitely an advice which like I have based on whatever I have experienced with Unbox.
Yeah, that's quite different from what I thought, which is that anything in deep tech or R&D as such. I mean, we kind of imagine people toiling away at labs or on the floor, very very siloed from customers or business as such, but what you're saying is, you have to build with the customer, because the cost of iteration, as you mentioned, is pretty high, right? How do you develop this mindset? How do you develop this thinking? Is it something that you've always had, or something that you had to learn through failure and so on?
So in our case, what we did was we were part of a program called Entrepreneur First. It's a VC fund which has these different cohorts running across different geographies in global context. So they had launched their cohort in India as well, and I and my co-founder, were part of that cohort. And in that program, we started with the concept and we started validating that concept rather than directly building a prototype. So we ended up talking to a lot of customers, potential customers globally, like logistics, e-commerce player, retail player. Those are the kind of industries we typically target today. So we validated the concept that, okay, we will end up building this product in the coming months. Will you be interested to take a paid trial or a paid, let's say, installation? So it's kind of for getting a sense of the from the market before you actually start putting a lot of effort on the product. Because in our case, our product was a multi-robot system. So even our prototype system is like 5-10 robots coming together and working, right? So it's kind of an expensive affair to even at the beginning. So we had to do that validation beforehand, and then we started getting the interest from customers. We started giving updates that, okay, hey, this is our first prototype, this is how it works, this is the next roadmap, this is what we will do in the next coming few months. Then people started looking at the videos, started coming to our facilities, looking at it closely, giving their feedback. And it's not a feedback only from the product perspective or only from one department. We used to get feedback from different perspectives. So let's say we deploy our robots on the operations floor. So their feedback can be on the ergonomics. So the person who is using our system, we have to consider that end user. So all these feedbacks you cannot get in your lab. You have to get feedback from the people who are actually on the ground and who are going to use your product. So you need to be in sync with what people want. Ultimately, you're building something to solve somebody's problems. If you can't just sell a pure,
As
just
simple as
because it's
that.
cool, you can't sell it. So although individually robots look cool, it looks great that, okay, bunch of robots doing something, but it has to be in sync with what people want and they want to pay money for. So yeah.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. I mean, oftentimes I think we're blinded by the coolness of the tech as such. I think it's very important to understand that the tech is a means to an end, and you really have to solve for the customer, right? And in that sense, I mean, the voice of the customer must be heard. How do you pick the problem and the concept, right? I mean, you did spend some time, after NUS at Flipkart and so on, and you have a background in robotics, obviously. But how do you pick the specific problem that you're solving with Unbox right now?
So this problem came in a way through my journey at Flipkart. So largely my background has been in the industry 4.0 sectors, so be it IoT, 3D printing, robotics across last almost 10 years now. Post my BTech. So I used to spend time within, let's say, startup ecosystems in Singapore. Then I also spent some time in Israel. Then came back to India to work with Flipkart. At Flipkart, my job was to deploy automation for them. So I was on the other side of the table looking at different technologies, warehouse automation solutions, robotic systems, and to deploy them in sync with, again, the same thing, in sync with the exact end user who is working on the operations field or operations floor, be it to improve the efficiency, reliability. So we looked at view. I used to deploy these systems, and I ended up observing some of the gaps within the existing systems, which are typically doing the sortation of packages or distribution of packages, because of my first hand experience, like while actually going there on ground and deploying these systems with my team. So that was the focus, or let's say that was the exposure for me, that, okay, these are the gaps, and this is a gap globally. It's not just a gap in the Indian ecosystem, but these kind of products are kind of available globally, and this is a problem which is a global problem. So I just had to validate that, okay, whether this is intense or whether this is a problem, great enough problem in terms of the scale of the problem. Then I started talking to customers across geographies before we actually deep dive and spend our own time building this product. So Flipkart was the platform for me to, because they gave me the exposure to this industry. And I ended up spending almost more than 3 years at Flipkart and looking at this problem very closely. And then eventually I took a call that, okay, I want to solve this problem. At that time, when I quit, I had just a concept in my mind and with my co-founder, and just a hypothesis that, okay, this is what we will build, this is how it will cost, this is how it will save money, this is how it will let's say look like. All those things were in concept stage, and we started interacting with customers including Flipkart, that okay, this is what we want to build, and people started getting interested and started giving LOIs, like letter of intent, to take a trial whenever we are ready. So that
Amazing.
was the background. But yeah, it was a kind of a calculated approach, not like a approach where I wanted to build something and then try to sell. I was very sure about the problem. The problem existed. It was about building the right solution, and then of course, then you tweak it or iterate it after one iteration after the other. So that is of course a natural phenomenon which happened in the last 3 years. But at least we knew what we wanted to build.
Amazing. So far you've spoken like a CEO. I'm going to ask you to wear a techie's hat for a bit, right? And we're going to take a short detour and talk about some of the recent developments in robotics and so on, right? I mean, obviously, some of the larger companies like Amazon or Flipkart, all of them are investing a ton of cash and resources in this entire fulfillment space as such. And once in a while, the Boston Dynamics team releases one of those dancing robots, and we think that they're going to capture the world tomorrow, right? I mean, we're going to be run by robots on the streets and whatnot. What are some of the recent exciting developments in this domain? What has happened in the last, like, let's say, couple of years or so that makes the Isaac Asimov sort of a dream near reality?
So I think a lot of innovation has happened across the robotics systems across industries. So be it logistics automation or manufacturing focused automation. If you look at the robotic arms or mobile robots, there are different types of robotic systems. But what has happened is the technology has advanced so much that it has become relatively, I wouldn't say a lot easier, but yeah, relatively easier to manufacture robot within a certain budget constraints or within a certain cost limit. For example, to manufacture a mobile robot now versus maybe 10 years ago, it was a different kind of a challenge. So a lot of innovation has happened there across computing, across the manufacturing sectors, getting the prototypes done. Even on the software front, which are actually controlling the robot, a lot of advancements have happened there, so that the robots have become efficient in terms of cost, in terms of performance. So this is going to continue, and this is a continuation process because this is what industry needs. So ultimately, these solutions are being built, except for few ones which are just right now, it just looks cool, but may not have the application right away. But technically, this is also advancement in terms of technology, and eventually there will be a point where even those cool looking robots may find some applications in the market. So this is a natural phenomenon. We have seen a bunch of a lot of progress across adoption of robots, right from, let's say, somewhere around 2010, there was a lot less percentage adoption of robots across the industries, be it logistics or manufacturing, when Amazon had acquired Kiva. And if you see the pattern afterwards, there are a bunch of companies which have come up in the industry with different types of systems, robotic systems, trying to solve certain problems in the industry. And this is just a scratching the surface because we are still in the beginning era of, in terms of, if you look at the number of robots deployed per capita globally or within regions like China, India, US, we are still in the beginning mode, I would say. So yeah, there's going to be a huge progress in terms of technology. Access to technology is going to be a lot easier. The cost of manufacturing robots is going to be much lesser, and that will drive the adoption in the market, because if people see value getting these robots in the warehouses or factory floors, of course people will want to scale up the deployments. Having said that, we also need to make sure the safety and the ergonomic aspects of the systems are taken care, because ultimately we are dealing with humans. So we need to build something which can be deployed along with humans, right? Technically you need to have some safety mechanisms to make sure people can use that kind of system.
Right, we're going to take a slightly longer detour as well, and from a I'm tempted to ask from a layperson's perspective, right? What is the 101 of building a robot? Now let's say you want to automate a task, etc. Where do you even begin?
So generally, they say that you look at the repetitive tasks, which are monotonous tasks, and that's where you actually focus on in the beginning. So let's say you identify a certain process in a factory floor or a warehouse. You look at that there is a repetitive pattern, that these are the tasks and this is the SOP, and which can be replicated by the automation system. that's a good way to start and start looking at building something on the hardware as well as the software side, so that you can get that monotonous job done in a better way rather than doing it manually. If there are any exceptions, they can be probably handled manually, or you can build a software intelligently that even the exceptions can be controlled to a certain extent. So that's the way to look at it. And second thing is, in terms of the value add, it should of course have some value add on the floor. Just because you can automate, you should not automate. Like there should be some value add or some impact on the operations or on the customers. So let's say what is the productivity improvement, whether people are doing much more with the robots, whether you are able to increase the accuracy, whether you're able to increase the speed, whether you are reducing the touch points. So those are other buckets you look at, and you technically can make a business case. And if the business case is good enough or it's attractive, that's a good sign that you should work on automation.
Right. And are the manufacturing components, etc., I mean, is it easily available here in India, or it's something that you have to import from Taiwan or China and elsewhere?
So in our case, we have a factory set up in Pune where we manufacture our robots. In terms of the quantum, most of our parts are built in India or made in India. Some of the parts which are typically sensors or some motors, few parts come from overseas markets like from Europe, from China. But most of the parts are manufactured here. So and we own the entire assembly of our product. So we do have like our own capability to make our own robot, design our own robot. So right from this design to assembly of our robots is done by our team. And we also have seen a lot of progress in Indian market in terms of the support six system, right? Be it manufacturing or on the battery side, there are a lot of development happening. So these things are positive signs that even India will have a robust ecosystem we can take support from. In the earlier days, it was not easy to build this kind of company. I think we are progressing to in terms of a good, let's say, path. Yeah.
Awesome. And you've decided to apply all of this in the fulfillment space, right? And it seems fairly obvious when you say automating repetitive tasks and wherever efficiency is of a higher importance, right? I mean, I was just reading that Amazon has gone from 1 in 1,000 errors for a packer to saying that 1 in 2,000 boxes, right? I mean, which is crazy, and there's a certain limit that humans will obviously hit. And so any kind of meaningful drive forward will have to be through automation, right? And which is why, I mean, they've kind of invested in not just the Kiva robotics, but also I think they've invested in these autonomous cars and whatnot to enable that. When you look at this fulfillment space, what are some challenges of solving in this space particularly? Like, as in, I mean, are all fulfillment centers somewhat similar? Do they have different priorities and so on?
Yeah. So in terms of the overall space, let's look at it from the supply chain network point of view. So supply chain network has bunch of facilities. So you can have a pickup hub where let's say you can have a, let's say, a small hub where you're getting the shipments. You can have a fulfillment center in the beginning where you're storing the shipments or storing and then packing those shipments, and then you're dispatching it. And then you have a sorting center where you basically sort those packages as per different locations of those packages. So there can be multiple sort centers within the network, and then eventually it goes to a delivery hub, and then you deliver the package, and delivery hub also sorts packages to the end customer. And you also have return centers because customers return packages. Let's say in the fashion category, the return percentage is very high, so you may have 20-30% packages coming back out of 100 packages. So you need to sort them back to the origins from you picked up. So these are different types of facilities, and with the different types of SLAs or different targets. Some facilities are meant to store packages and pack those items. Some facilities are focusing on sorting the items as early as possible and shipping it out. So but fundamentally every facility will try to have a very very low TAT or turnaround time, right from the inbound of the shipment to outbound of the shipment. They will try to minimize the time taken by the shipment. So while you do that, you technically want to be as efficient as possible. You want to pick up faster, you want to pack faster, you want to sort faster. And this is where automation come into picture. So the automation plays a role in speeding things up. Second thing is, as you are aware, maybe like in terms of the real estate, for example, in India we have about 20,000 plus pin codes where people are delivering packages, and a lot of tier 2 and tier 3 places in Indian scenario are demanding faster delivery speeds, and people are opening up warehouses near urban clusters or in expensive areas. It's very very important that you do the job in least possible square footage rather than occupying a huge warehouse or a huge field. So you need automation which can do it faster, at the same time do it in a much lesser space than what the traditional systems have been doing. Otherwise you can't scale up. So people are finding new ways where automation can do this both things together. One is speed things up at a highest possible accuracy and do it in a much more let's say smaller space. The third thing which can be a downside in some of the automation systems is some automation systems may require a huge infrastructure, so people may not want to deploy those in the facilities whose rental periods or forecast is not beyond, let's say, 1 year. Like people may want to relocate somewhere else and they may see automation as a hurdle. This is where the plug and play automation comes into picture, where it almost acts as flexible as an automation as a manual process, putting the robots or plug and play systems in a matter of days. For example, in worst case scenario, if you want to relocate after 6 months, you can always relocate in a, maybe pack the automation system in a couple of days and you ship it outside to a different facility wherever you want to go. So building compact, efficient, and a plug and play system is something. This is just a large theme, so I'm talking about large requirements coming from the industry. This is what the industry needs, and this is applicable across functions, like across processes in the warehouse. So we are focusing on several of them. So we are focusing on things related to let's say distribution of packages. So it can be parcel sorting, it can be order consolidation. These are some of the terms which we use generally in the industry. So we kind of use our system to automate this process using minimal area and kind of in a very plug and play fashion.
This episode of the Startup Operator podcast is brought to you by Park Avenue. Now that we're all back at the office meeting colleagues and clients, it's time to ditch those PJs and look sharp with Park Avenue's range of 100% cotton, wrinkle-free shirts. They're super easy to maintain and keep you looking fresh through the day. So my fellow startup operators, visit the Park Avenue store or myraymond.com and check out the new wrinkle-free shirt collection.
Right. I'm curious, how long does it take to deploy, from understanding what is required to actually deploying those robots, and then maybe, if they have to change things up and move to a different facility, etc., how easy or difficult is that?
So if I look at our example, so generally the deployment time is in 1 to 2 weeks time frame. So right from the, let's say you enter the facility and you go live, in terms of installation, it takes several days or maybe a couple of weeks. In some cases, we have done deployments in a single day, like almost a single day in one of the hubs we had deployed our robots in. Of course, it depends on the scale, but generally we target less than 2 weeks of deployment because our systems are quite plug and play. So you technically consider this more of a IKEA kind of approach. It's all modular things. We try to design our systems in a modular fashion so that the end installation is very quick for the customer. So the goal is always about lowering down the installation time so that the operations team on ground can go like quicker, or if they have existing operations going in and automation deployment disturbs them, it should be a minimal disturbance to them. If the automation system is getting deployed in a brownfield project where the actual operation is still in place, having a 6 months kind of a deployment time is going to hamper or disturb the flow of the operations process. So it's always good to have quick time to deploy. So that's the kind of time frame we target with our systems.
Right. And these systems also have to plug into some existing infrastructure, right? And I don't just mean physical, but also like software infrastructure as well. And one thing that, I've noticed with the whole industry 4.0 or IoT as well, the fact that the software standards haven't really evolved as much is a challenge, right? I mean, compared to like, let's say, software development as such, normal software development as such, right? On the enterprise or consumer side of things, let's say SaaS or whatever. How do you deal with that? I mean, because every time you deploy your system, I mean, you might be having to integrate with different types of software, different type of stack, and so on, right?
Yeah. So there are two types of let's say integration options. Two ways integration can happen. One is certain companies might be using off the shelf standard WMS or standard ERP systems, for example, we can build pre-integrated modules or pre-integrated wrappers so that it becomes plug and play. So integration efforts are much lesser if you are integrating it with the standard industry solutions like in WMS or warehouse management system or the ERP kind of systems. In some cases, you may have to deploy it with the in-house built WMS for a particular customer. In that case, depending on how, let's say, how the overall structure of the software is, you may have to put in some additional efforts or maybe lesser effort depending on the customer to customer. In some cases, you may need to do some kind of hand holding, and maybe you need to spend maybe a one more week than what you expected in those cases. But that's what the industry is at today, because the space is not yet standard in terms of the usage of WMSs or ERP systems. But it's not a very, let's say, big challenge we have come across so far. Of course, with the whatever limited experience we have in the last 1 year of deployment, but this is something is can be a solvable problem. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And I think, I mean, it might take time, but obviously, I mean, it's tending towards that, right? I mean, it's tending
Yeah,
towards
yeah, it's tending
standardization.
towards that. It's not so. At least the industry is going to a automation ready phase. So people are becoming automation ready as the more digitalization of warehouses and the overall supply chain is becoming. The more easy to kind of have communication between two systems, the more easy to deploy the automation, right? So that part is getting solved gradually. So yeah.
And what are some of the common use cases that you're serving within this whole fulfillment space itself? And, how is your customer acquisition sort of working at this point?
Yeah. So in terms of the use cases, we typically have several of them. So one use case can be, let's say, you are sorting items as per the different zip codes, pin codes, or let's say different delivery regions. Let's say you run an e-commerce company and you have a sorting center and you want to sort, let's say, 30,000 packages a day in couple of shifts, maybe 16 hours. So roughly you're looking at sorting 2,000 parcels per hour, and you are serving, let's say, 200 pin codes or 200 points, delivery points. So you may want to set up a sortation process to sort these many packages into those many destinations. So each destination you may have a bag or a container where you want to sort those packages. So this is one process which we automate, one type of process which we automate. So where you are looking at the customer data, as in parcel data, where that package belongs to, and you put that package in the right location. So if the parcel is going to a hub in Pune, I'll put that parcel in the bag which belongs to Pune hub using that robot. And the integration helps us identify or let's say capture the data when we scan that barcode on the parcel. So this is one type of process which typically happens in the sortation center, and as well as in the delivery hubs, where in delivery hubs also people do sortation as per the last mile routes people take. Let's say a delivery guy is taking a route in a particular sector. I may want to create a bag for his route. So I might have, let's say, 10 delivery people from one delivery hub, and I might want to create 10 bags for them. So I need to sort as per those routes. So this is another use case our system can solve. And then the other sort of use cases where, let's say, you have multiple orders or multiple items under one order. Let's say you order t-shirt, phone, and jeans from an e-commerce company, and it belongs to a certain facility. Let's say it is coming from a single warehouse. They may want to ship those things together as one consolidated order. Here I need to sort as per your order ID. So let's say I'm sorting this t-shirt and jeans and phone as per Roshan's order. I'll put those three things in a particular tote, and that tote will be passed to a packing station, and ultimately it will get packed. So I might have thousands of orders where I am doing this sorting activity as per the orders. So this is another use case our robots can do. Our robots can do the automation of this entire order consolidation process. The third thing is the returns. So you have return packages, and typically return packages are not of good quality. So people may have returned it with bad, like maybe torn out packages, or maybe with very bad quality poly bag, or kind of a not so sophisticated package you have when you begin the journey. In the return packages, it's very bad. So our robots also sort those packages as per the origin. These are some of the use cases which we are let's say have been working on or have already deployed. The use cases can come in the retail industry or e-commerce industry or a 3PL domain, 3PL industry, or even the other sectors. Some of the sectors have approached us recently. Like some of the companies in the other sectors have also approached us, be it pharma or even manufacturing may have use cases for these processes. So, but largely the processes are same. Like fundamentally, the logic wise, it's all same.
Right. And how are you finding your customers today? I mean, do you have like an outbound sales team? Is there a lot of inbound interest? Do you have partnerships? How are you growing the business?
What we have done is so far we have done a limited effort on the marketing and sales so far. We do have plans to put in relatively higher efforts in the coming year with the increased team size in sales and marketing. But so far our sales have been mostly driven from inbound and from our own network in the industry. So a lot of time it's an inbound from, let's say, a customer in India or overseas. People have started reaching out to us, looking at maybe our post on LinkedIn, maybe on YouTube. They might have seen a video, and then they are reaching out. So that's the kind of pattern we have seen. But as we are looking at scaling up in the coming year, we are looking at acquiring the customers through digital as well as offline channels. So it can be a industry exhibition or expo, let's say a logistic expo, or let's say it can be social media, LinkedIn marketing, or email marketing. Those are some of the avenues which we are looking at in the coming year. But that's the plan for the coming year. But largely so far, it's mostly inbound or network.
And what can we expect on your product roadmap? I mean, is there a plan to get beyond the fulfillment centers, maybe, launch drones and autonomous vehicles and all of those things?
We have a lot of things going on within the same use cases or within the same industry that we are just at the let's say the beginning. Like we are just scratching the surface. As we deploy our products, we are getting a lot of requirements from customers to enrich the same set of systems. So we are looking at introducing new types of robots within the same fulfillment category to address new cases, let's say edge cases where our robots, let's say, can sort larger packages or heavy payload packages, or automating the pre and post sorting part. So a lot of those things are happening at this point. So we are focusing on that. So our goal is to give the best possible efficient system to our customers and fulfill that. But we do have some plans to introduce new robots and new systems within the same category. We may want to explore the areas in the manufacturing and the other industries beyond fulfillment in the coming years. But today we are kind of getting a lot of, let's say, bandwidth allocated to the existing set of areas of focus. So mostly fulfillment related work.
Yeah. No, I mean, if you talk to your customers, they will give you a product roadmap for the next 5 years, right?
Yeah. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So in the next 18 months, right? I mean, do you have active plans to sort of internationalize as well? Because, I mentioned drones. Some of the drone providers that I've spoken to have done really well internationally as well. So we've gone from importing drones to actually exporting drones on that front. And I think something similar can happen in this as well, right? In the whole fulfillment space and robotics and so on. So yeah, anything on that front?
So globally, this problem is a global problem. Whatever we are solving is a global problem. It's not just limited to our country. So we are also looking at the global markets, Western market as well as Southeast Asian market. We are planning to deploy something in the coming year in the European region. We also have one expo, like logistic expo, coming up in Chicago in the US in March, where we will be displaying our robots there. And we're already talking to some of the retail logistics companies in the US who have shown interest in what we're building. So we have good traction coming from Europe and US at this point. The idea will be to start doing deployments and start establishing the presence in those markets in the coming year. Because the problem there is, let's say, labor constraint, labor shortage, and they have a huge need to do automation. So we see a lot of synergy in what we are building and what they want.
Yeah, yeah, no, for sure. I mean, I think, as you mentioned, labor shortage, right, is a key thing, especially some of the European countries and whatnot. We've learned a great deal about your space and your business over the last 30 minutes or so. For someone who is contemplating maybe starting up in this space, right, a similar business as such, what are some, two or three very non-intuitive things that they will understand once they, fall down get up and realize, right, from having executed in this space? What are those things, that those secrets that are revealed only to practitioners and operators, right? Or what are some two or three of those things that they should be aware of?
I think it's better to have the on ground knowledge before you start building the product, because in your mind you might be thinking XYZ product, but in reality, especially if you are building a hardware product, the reality might be very very different. Like on ground, you need to be aware of what you're building, to for whom you're building. So have a very very good market research done, and estimate the timeline of your product development. May not be an accurate estimate, but have some reasonable time given to your product development. So yeah, this is something which I think should be taken into account when you're building a hardware startup. You need to be patient. You can't have maybe revenues from the version one of a robot. You need to have a lot of iterations. It might take years to get to a commercialization. So be ready when you want to start something on the hardware front. The initial years might require a lot of patience, but if you play it well, then of course it can give you rewards.
On that note, has fundraising become any simpler for your kind of startups? I mean, uh, because what do you show as traction, right? And what do you show in terms of reach and engagement and those kind of things, right? The conventional, like conventional software businesses, for example, you can't show any of those things. So they're betting on potential, right? Potential to execute. So how does the whole fundraising process work for you?
Generally, we have been fortunate to have good investors on cap table, people who understood the complexities and why we are taking whatever time we have taken to commercialize. I think so. So it's the milestones are typically in terms of initially the milestones are largely from the product and tech perspective. Like you had a version one, then you had some feedback from customers. You are progressing in terms of product journey, but towards the maturity of your product development cycle, you need to show some kind of a indication or signals from the commercial point of view. You need to have some paid pilots, you need to have some contracts, you need to have some orders in place. As I mentioned, you can't build the product in silos and just have advancement in product and you don't have any customers. So we had LOIs or customer interested in our product or concept from day one. So before even we started the company, I would say, like before even we had a product in even a prototype. So we had customers interested in what my concept or our concept was. So it's better to have those milestones defined and align your investors with it and show those tractions. And ultimately people are looking at minimizing the risk. So you minimize the technology risk, you show the proof that okay, this you can build, you can deploy this on ground, and then the next step is to commercialize it. And to show the commercialization, you start engaging with customers much earlier rather than going directly with the final version or maybe a kind of a mature version, because people may have a lot of changes done and you'll end up spending all over like time all over again to meet those requirements.
Yeah. So basically, build with your customers and align your stakeholders to your vision, right? I mean, because these folks are going to be part of the journey for a long time with you. Yeah.
So initially you may not have the metrics with like revenue metrics or MRR or ARR metrics from year one, if your product is deep tech and it takes time. But you need to have some metrics defined with your investors that these are the points which I will tick off in the next 12 months, and I will try to minimize the risk of the venture.
Right. Hey, before we end the podcast, any books or other podcasts that you would recommend to our listeners?
Generally, I listen to blitzscaling, reid hoffman, then the books like, so I have some a few of the books, although I have yet to finish some of them, but 0 to 1, then there are a bunch of other books which I typically, so within the startup phase, so wherever, so I always try to find books which can improve the efficiency or working style. So generally I try to buy those kind of books.
Awesome. Hey, this was a fascinating chat, Pramod, and thank you so much for being on the podcast again, and all the best for everything that you have coming up.
Thank you, Roshan, it was a pleasure talking to you.
In the Park Avenue PowerPoint segment, we review some of the highlights of this conversation. Number one, Pramod says when you're building a hardware product, it's important to work with the customer. Getting feedback early on is really critical as it takes time to iterate between versions and the cost of rework can be really high. Pramod is very bullish about how robotics is growing in India. He says access to cutting edge tech will become a lot easier. costs will be lowered, and all of this will drive adoption. But Pramod is also cautious about being overly optimistic and trying to automate everything. He says you have to see tangible improvements in productivity, accuracy, speed, or reducing touch points to really make the business case for automation. Well, that's it, folks. I hope you liked this episode. If you did, don't forget to rate and review us. It really helps more people discover our content. I'll see you again on another episode of the Startup Operator podcast with another fantastic guest. See you.